Across the UK, this is Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip.
Hi, this is Darren from Broadcast Revolution and welcome to another episode of Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip. We're going across the country speaking to lots of presenters, producers from BBC and commercial radio stations. And I'm delighted to say joining me now is Sophie Law, who's a presenter and broadcast journalist at BBC Radio Oxford. Hello, Sophie.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Thanks very much for being part of our podcast. So we'll crack on. First things first, I sort of want to find out, you know, really how things have changed over the last few months, sort of pre-COVID and, you know, now during the pandemic itself at BBC Oxford.
Oh, massively. There's very few people in the building. The structure, the schedule has totally changed. Up until last week, I hadn't actually presented by myself for 6 months, which I used to do more than weekly. So I've been the whole time during the lockdown and beyond, I've been doing my other normal role, which is reading the news on breakfast and sort of co-hosting. So it hasn't felt too strange for me, but for some of my colleagues, everything has shifted completely, or they've not been on air at all because a whole show has disappeared within the schedule. We're probably one of the busiest NCA studios in the country for local radio, which is every BBC local station has a studio that other stations can borrow for free to have guests in quality. And because of Oxfordshire just being full of boffins and interesting people and people doing cool stuff, it was normally a rotating door in there every day with people going in. Great for us as well because we could sort of leech that content for ourselves. And obviously we haven't seen a single guest in the building for 6 months either, so it's changed, you know, hugely. So
just looking at the changes themselves, then obviously, you know, we've all had to adapt to the changes and a lot more interviews on sort of FaceTime and Skype, etc. Do you sort of have insight on, I say in inverted commas, future plans and what the shows will like, or is it, you know, how is the planning ahead, or is it sort of, you know, day by day, week by week?
I mean, we still have, you know, production teams planning ahead on some of the shows on a really long-term basis. Other things change day to day, but certainly we've got a structure going forward in that this make a difference thing that all of BBC local radio does every hour, which is, you know, either a person that is in some way making a difference in the community that we're celebrating. Or just to give you an example from this week, we, as part of another story that we were doing, discovered there's a blind runner in Oxfordshire who really desperately wants to run some of the virtual races, but can't without a partner. And she's lost her partner because he's moved away. And she's been really struggling to find anyone. So we at the moment are appealing for and trying to connect her with someone, you know, a runner who will come and train with her, because she's been running on a treadmill inside a house for 6 months. She hasn't been out into the fresh air to run because she can't.
So you just mentioned obviously the Make a Difference stories. How important are they to sort of programming at the moment?
They are hugely important. I mean, initially they were the only beacon of light in a very depressing news run that we were really struggling to balance out, you know, the very, very dark news and the very serious stuff with lighter things. And it's not always lighter, but certainly it's something that will kind of be a bit more uplifting. So that is going to be a part of the schedule for the foreseeable future. You know, it could be the man in Oxfordshire who has the record for the world's fastest shed, who's just decided he's going to try and do it again with a lawnmower or a wheelbarrow he was riding last week. It doesn't have to be sort of charitably or community based, but interesting humans, uplifting stuff. You know, maybe it's a little girl we had who has a hearing aid, and she wrote to Boris Johnson and sent him a homemade mask with a bit of perspex around the mouth, which she wanted him to wear to raise awareness of the fact that, you know, people who lip read are really struggling with masks, all sorts of things like that, sort of interesting or helpful or uplifting. That is going to be a cornerstone of all the programmes going forward.
And then just putting that to the side slightly, what other sort of stories are of interest in programming? So sort of, stories that focus local case studies, or, celebrities, or the I'm trying to think of the stories that aren't so coronavirus focused.
Yeah.
So any other sort of stories that would be of interest to you guys?
Yeah, I think, similar to the programs before, celebrities are always of interest, particularly if it's, something related to things like Bake Off or Strictly, or people who live locally, which for us in Oxfordshire is brilliant. We have a lot of famous people that live locally, and you can kind of tie that back. And even if it's just one tiny little question about something they love where they live as part of a wider interview about something else entirely, that's always really nice. And yeah, interesting stuff, going forward, kind of things like the polls and the research where there's something a little bit quirky. Or the other thing is just things that we can relate to people in our target audience. So obviously Oxfordshire is first and foremost, but if there's something that isn't Oxfordshire, but it's something that will affect people in our area, then absolutely. I mean, for example, we get quite a few press releases about stuff to do with the sea, and we're the most landlocked county in the country. So I know that, people do blanket send stuff out, but for us, that's a no-go, because it's just not something that's at all relevant to anyone who's living here.
And have you taken more of an interest in experts within sectors since coronavirus? Is this something you're potentially looking to continue doing?
We've always been interested in experts. We try not to overuse them, because it's always nicer to get a real voice than an expert on something. But yeah, I mean, the lady who advised the Chinese government on SARS lives locally, and we've used her at least once a week. She's an epidemiologist, just for everything from mask wearing in schools to whether 2 metre or 1 metre makes a difference. I think people do trust someone who has a good background and a good knowledge of something, and it's always useful, particularly more so now, I think, in a reassuring way, in that we are being very careful not to scaremonger, or even down to the language we're using. So we would say cluster rather than outbreak, because outbreak suggests everyone's going to die. And we're trying to be as balanced as we possibly can. So if there's a reassuring expert where you can say this and this has happened, but here's someone else to say actually it might be a good thing, or there are pros and cons, or I think definitely BBC Local is interested in that sort of angle of, we are covering what's happening in the news, and it might sound scary, but here's someone to make you realise that it's not.
Great. Now, sort of like asking this question, if you had to pitch your show station, how would you do it?
Wow, that's a good one. Ours, I mean, if I talk about breakfast, which is David Previs, the presenter, and I sort of muck about with him, I would say great silly fun to wake you up with a real Oxfordshire flavour and a love for where we live.
Now, looking a little bit more into sort of you as a person, as a presenter, where do you get your news from?
This horrifies my bosses. Twitter. If I had to give up every other thing, website, social media, I love Twitter, because not only do you get the breaking news stories as they come, you can see reaction. It also alerts you. I follow a lot of people from a lot of different industries, and just people who live here as well. So you can quite often get some great tip-offs or some good ideas of issues that are important to people, or things that are going on, just from a quick scroll through. I mean, I love a kind of Sunday paper, but I have 2 small boys, and the time to sit and relax and flick through things like that is minimal. So yeah, Twitter would be my number one. I actually said that in an interview and got a very horrified face back from my news editor, but it's so fast moving, and if taken with the right pinch of salt, it can be really, really useful, I think.
Well, make sure you're following Broadcast Revolution on Twitter. That's at Broadcast Revo for those listening in. What's been your sort of funniest moment in radio?
Oh my gosh. We laugh every day. Like, we get very, very silly. Probably the thing that's made me laugh the most ever, and we had to put a song on because I was sort of snort laughing so hard, was we went and did, our friends went and did a ghost tour at Oxford Castle, and we were chatting about it, and both of them were gay, but not in a relationship together. And I said, just, when things just sort of come out of your mouth without you realizing, I said, oh, that must have really put the willies up you, when they were talking about a scary moment, and none of us could breathe for about 10 minutes. And that's the only time in my life I've ever been fully lost for. I just couldn't, none of us could speak. It was brilliant.
And from funniest to sort of proudest, is there a moment in your sort of radio career that you would say is your sort of proudest moment?
The last 6 months has taught us so much about how many people really rely on BBC Local in particular for companionship, and we've had some really beautiful messages and stuff that's really moved us to tears. But I think the thing that I will never ever forget was a girl called Becca Henderson, who was one of the only 2 people in the UK to not have a heart inside her. So she had a mechanical heart which she carried in a rucksack, and we came across her sort of by accident, and she lived in Oxfordshire and also was studying at Oxford University, and we spoke to the surgeon who had helped develop the artificial heart. We had her into the studio where you could hear it pumping. It was fascinating, and we followed her along. She was really desperate for a heart transplant, and we followed her story for about a year and a half. And she sadly died last year. She had the transplant but never recovered from it. And we continued the story with her parents, and all of us were absolutely devastated when her mum emailed. It was during a show one morning, and it was really hard to actually finish the show. But I really feel like we celebrated her and showed that kind of anything is possible life, and so just some of the amazing technology that's being built in Oxfordshire. It sort of pulled everything in together. It was so off the county, and she was so fabulous that I really feel like we sort of left her a legacy, and we helped push the college. She'd finished her degree but not done her exams when she died, so we helped petition for her to be given her degree posthumously, and they raised a lot of money in her honour for the hospitals, thousands and thousands of pounds. So that's probably what I was most proud to be a part of.
And I suppose that's a very, very moving story. And I suppose my next question probably ties quite a bit into that, because I was going to say, what's the best thing about local radio? And I suppose being able to do those work on those kind of stories are, I suppose.
To really be able to make a difference. I mean, this whole campaign that we've been running through is called Make a Difference, and it's a bit like the word unprecedented. Every time we say it now, someone rolls their eyes because it's become so cliched within our building. I don't think so much so anywhere else. But just that point where you can pick up campaigns. For example, during lockdown, we had one of our local MPs on for a surgery, which we've done all the way throughout. And someone messaged in saying that they were a key worker at the hospital in Oxford, and so was their other half, and they had a daughter. And what were they going to do if both of them caught COVID and died? They didn't have any family. And Layla Moran took it into Parliament and petitioned the government, and the government created this coronavirus fund for families of people, key workers who've died with COVID, and they can now access a payment of £60,000. And you're like, that will change people's lives. And it wasn't our idea. It was, someone else's concern, something, their real life that was happening to them. We were able to connect them with their MP, and on it went. And it's that real, it doesn't have to be as big as that, but it's that real feeling that you are, listening to people, trying to help them, connect them with the people who will solve their issues, or making a fuss until someone solves their issue. And that's pretty awesome.
And sort of, I suppose my final question is for sort of those listening who want to pitch, the station, what advice would you give them about how to pitch, when to pitch, especially in sort of current times? Is it best to just now do it on email because everyone's sort of working remotely?
Yeah, I mean, we've been answering a lot of calls, asking for specific people, and there's hardly anyone in the building, and that I don't think that's going to change for a long time. So email is best. I know it can sometimes feel like that gets ignored, but I would just say, target it as personally as you can, not necessarily to that human, but to the station. For BBC Local, if it doesn't have Oxfordshire anywhere in it, you've got to work twice as hard to make it happen. So certainly referencing the Make a Difference campaign, having some kind of angle that could pitch it to make a difference. The producers are always looking for different ideas about that. And not too long. I would always say not too long. I probably have 30 an hour emails. So the shorter and the more eye-catching, the better. Short, succinct, not a great big generic email title, something in the subject header, because you're scrolling through tens and tens. Just try and make it stand out, try and make it snappy, and try and make it either relevant to Oxfordshire or something that will make them think, ooh, that for our listeners, our target audience is sort of 50 plus, 50, 55-ish. Something like that will fit, or something that could fit to the area. So the opposite of the coastal sea sort of thing for us, that would be my tip.
Well, Sophie, thank you so much. That was, fantastic insight into sort of, the station, how it's, coping at the moment through COVID, and also, nice to find out a little bit more about you as well. So really, thank you so much for being a part of our podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really fun.
Thank you. So that was Sophie Law, presenter and broadcast journalist at BBC Radio Oxford. Subscribe, and we will have another episode of our regional radio road trip very soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Revo and Instagram at Broadcast Revolution. #Join the Broadcast Revolution.